Hello and welcome to this little talk about some great issues. We will be talking about the two superpowers of the world, and it is appropriate to start with a picture of that statue everyone is meeting when they arrive to New York City by boat, and that is a symbol of American freedom, American liberty. Today, this morning, when I woke up, I listened to the news on national television, just a short news summary, and they told there that an American ship was heading toward Oslo harbor, and that ship is called USS Gerald R. Ford, and it's the biggest military ship in the world. It has close to 100 flying objects on its deck, and that is actually more than the whole defense of Norway. So a real superpower is visiting Norway and Oslo this very day. And the reporter told us the power, the muscles of America, and all the weaponry, all the money, all the influence this superpower has in the world today. So it was very intriguing to look at this live broadcasting of this enormous military ship that is hosting the country of Norway these days. And there is another superpower in this world beside America, and that is a spiritual superpower. And this spiritual superpower is headed by the Pope, currently Pope Francis, and he is really involved in all kinds of peace talks in this world. Currently, he is trying to intervene in that war between Russia and Ukraine, and he doesn't seem to be very successful. He is also trying to bring different religions together, and he gives honor to the different religions. Recently, he told some monks that he wished that Buddha could bless them, would bless them. And the most interesting and intriguing thing in these days, in this world, is really the intimate friendship between these two superpowers, because there has not always been a friendship between them. There has actually been enmity for hundreds of years, actually. And if we can read the response the Secretary of State gave just at the end of the First World War, when certain Catholics wanted to bring in the Catholic Church in the peace negotiations, and he refused to give in for this suggestion, and therefore he stated concerning this, "We are a republic, and like France, Switzerland, and other republics, we do not wish to set up relations with the Holy See, whose objectives are openly in contrast to the democratic ideals of America." This was the viewpoint for a long, long time in America. Everyone realized that America had been founded on the principles of liberty and democracy, as Norskov Olsson tells in his wonderful book, Papal Supremacy and American Democracy. American democracy, with its numerous blessings, has its religious origin in a specific Protestant tradition, one that opposed both papal supremacy and the reformers' alliance with the state and subservience to the monarch. Another great church historian, Albert Hüma, he says mostly the same. Modern democracy, as has often been pointed out, has in a large degree sprung from the labors of the Dutch Baptists and their associates in England. who followed them much later. This is quoted in Norskov Olsson's wonderful book. And the conclusion to Norskov Olsson is that only when there is absolute separation between church and state can there be religious liberty. So that is one of the key points of the American Constitution. It all started in the 1600s, in the beginning of the 1600s, when Englishmen went over to America and established Jamestown. A few years afterwards, certain very religious people in Holland, they were exiles from England. In England, there was not much tolerance for dissenters in the late 1500s and the beginning of the 1600s. So many of them moved to Holland, where they could enjoy a certain freedom of religion. But even there, they were pushed into a corner when England and Holland decided to ally themselves against against Spain. So the English monarch, he demanded from Holland that they sent the dissenters who were exiled because of religious reasons, they sent them back to England so that they could be punished. So these first pilgrims to America, they had a hard time there in Holland, and they decided to move over to the promised land, Americas. Many had failed on the very hard trip over there with on ships, but they put their trust in the Lord, and they decided to move over and establish a Christian community. Out of all the voyages to the American colonies from 1620 to 1640, the Mayflower's first crossing of Pilgrim Fathers has become the most culturally iconic and important in the history of migration from Europe to the New World during the Age of Discovery. It is something to think about when we go back to the beginnings of the European settlement in America, on the east coast of America, where the Englishmen settled first. It is quite amazing to see how things have developed from that time. There has even been released a stamp in memory for that great event, and it is a symbol of the beginning of this new continent that would one day become the greatest nation in the world. And one reason why it became the greatest nation of the world is because of its constitution. In 1787, May 14, the words were put on paper and became part of the First Amendment to the Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So that is a very foundational law that protects the dignity of man. And that is one reason why America became such a great nation. In 1776, on July 4th, that great day in American history, the Declaration of Independence was signed. And the words are very famous. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So this was now well-founded, and up until this time, there were extremely few Catholics in the areas of America where the Englishmen settled. When the Declaration of Independence was signed, there were approximately 1% of the total population. 1% were Catholics in these days. There were approximately 2.5 million people at that time, and about 1% of them were Catholics. So a tiny, tiny little minority. So the Catholics had just mingled there since the 1600s, and there were much tension. There was much tension between the Catholics and the Protestants. Even in some parts of this new country, there were great persecution against Catholics. So it was not easy in those days to be a Catholic in America. Nevertheless, they had a plan, and toward the end of the 1700s, two very significant persons paved the way for future growth of the Catholic Church. One is called Charles Carroll, and he was one of the signers of the Declaration. And he was also one of the richest in the colonies and a dedicated Catholic. He owned 60,000 acres of land, and he was dedicated to American republicanism. That is, no king, no pope. He feared extreme democracy, and he was the brother of John Carroll. And John Carroll is probably the most important Catholic in the history of the United States of America. He was a former Jesuit. At that time, actually, the Pope had banned the Jesuit order, so they had to go underground. But John Carroll, he remained a Jesuit, I suppose, when he was crowned as the first bishop, so to say, in August 15, 1790. It was a big deal, actually, because John Carroll was a communist. He was very respectful to the Protestants. He was positive to reading the scriptures among Catholics, and he was in favor of using vernacular in liturgy, in contrast to what was the norm in Europe to use the Latin language there. He owned two slaves, Charles and Alexis, and he appeared to be a good man. But of course, he had some ambitions for the church. He was really the man behind the first growth of the Catholic Church in America. He facilitated for the institutions that would later pop up, many of them, and he made sure to establish all the necessary foundation for the church to build on later. Here we see the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary in 1806. That was the first cathedral built in America of the Catholics. And we may ask why the Catholic Church has grown so immensely over the years since that time, because it began with great opposition. And today it's actually 25% of the population over in America, in the United States of America. And I will suggest a few points that are major reasons for the growth of the Catholic Church in America. First, they were on a continent where people had this idea of separating the church from the state. Many had been had a very hard time in Europe before they left for America. They felt that America could be a free place where they could exercise their conscience toward God. They could. They didn't need to be oppressed by either a king or a pope. So for them, for the Catholic Church to work in America at that time was quite convenient, because they had the same rights as Americans, as Protestant Americans, even if there were tension between these two groups. And then, of course, the Jesuit pioneer work at the end of the 1700s and beginning of the 1800s laid the foundation for the future growth. Another very significant factor is the wave of immigrations that came to America. And first, we have the Frenchmen. Louisiana was an area not belonging to the 13 states that unified to become the United States of America. So when that part was included in the United States of America, and it was originally French, mainly French-speaking people there, these were of a Catholic origin, so that gave lots of growth to the church. Later, the Irish came, and then a wave of East European Catholics entered America, especially Italians and other from Catholic countries. Another factor is the labor unions, where the poor Catholic workers, they organized and put pressure on the government for for those whom they worked for higher salaries and for better working conditions. And they became a very powerful factor in American life, and it in many ways unified the Catholics. Then we have all the expansion of institutions. Hundreds of universities and colleges and hospitals were built. And today, the Catholic Church is the second largest facilitator of health in America after the government. The Catholics, they used to live in urban areas, and when they moved into city life, they came in contact with politics, and they more increasingly became engaged in politics. And remember, the Jesuits, they started the universities, they started mission work, so the platform was ready already. And lots of Catholics had gone through that educational system, and they were ready to go out in the world and contribute to the political life in America. If we jump forward quite a long time to the 1960s, when Kennedy had his landmark speech, because he was the first Catholic to be nominated to be president. And that was quite a sensation. Never before had people even thought about this. And then suddenly we have a very charismatic president, and he was a Catholic of all things. So he decided from the first moment to disavow papal influence. And he was affirming his belief in an America where, as he stated in that famous speech, no public official either requests or accepts instructions on public policy from the Pope, the National Council of Churches, or any other ecclesiastical source. This was perhaps not in harmony with the ambitions of Rome, I don't know. There are people who think that the Vatican do not like the idea of an American president. The last 4 or 5 presidents, they have all had had a Catholic vice president recently. But in those days, it was a sensation to have a Catholic president. He was killed not long after, and of course there has been speculation concerning that, and I'm not going into those things. Then a few years afterwards, the Pope, John the 23rd, called for a council, an ecumenical, that is a Catholic council, and it is called the Second Vatican Council. And it started there in 1962, ended in 1965. John the 23rd died after a few sessions in 1963, so Paul VI took over, leading out in these sessions. And if we jump a few decades forward, we see that for the first time in American history, the Catholic Church was taken into the warmth, and Ronald Reagan was the first to stretch out the arm. He was, of course, by profession a Protestant, and he and John Paul II became quite good friends, it seems. And we recall how they conspired to destroy the Soviet Empire, and they were not concerned about the Middle East or scandals in the Catholic Church or politics in America. What they were concerned about was that universal threat of communism and the Soviet Empire in particular. So they called each other on the phone every week for some time, and you know what happened? The Soviet collapsed, and we remember Solidarity, L'Equalesa, we remember all these happenings around the fall of the Soviet Empire, the Berlin Wall, everything. And it was really an important transition point in history. Because before that point, there were two competitors for universal rulership of this world, or so there were two superpowers, the America and the Soviet Empire. And now the Soviet Empire is gone, and afterwards the prestige of the Catholic Church has just grown and grown until the moment when actually the Pope was invited to give a speech in the Congress, and that was a historical sensation, evidence that now the Catholic Church had been accepted and welcomed into the warmth of American society. And we know that every time a Pope is visiting America, the president, I've heard, goes to the airport and welcome the guests. When the King of Norway, as I understand, when he comes to America, he has to take a taxi to the White House. No president is meeting him in the airport. But this is not the case with the Pope. He is in a unique position in the world and in America. And even the Vatican flag is there together with the American flag outside the White House. The growth of the Catholic Church in America has been enormous since the beginning of the United States history. It was made into an independent country there in 1776, and today it is estimated that 1% of the population were Catholics in those days. You can see on this graph how this has changed enormously. Today, there are between 70 and 100 million Catholics. It's very difficult to know exactly how many Catholics there are in America, but the growth is enormous from this tiny 1% in 1776. Today, about 25% of USA's population is Catholic. And that is quite significant. And people would say, okay, Mr. Jørgensen, so what? This is the development of the world, and there are many Catholics in the world, and why shouldn't they also settle in America? There are some concerns, however, around these things, because America is the country of the free. It's the country of the free and the land of the brave. And is it really possible to merge Catholic social politics with the idea of American freedom? Recently, an extremely interesting book was published, and it was not published anywhere in the world. It was published in a very recognized academic publishing house called Stanford University Press. Just a few days ago, last week actually, they announced that a list was published listing the 1,000 best universities in the world. Harvard was on the top, then MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, number 2, and what university is number 3? Stanford University, number 3 on the list. And of the 12 top universities of the world, of the 12, 10 of them were Americans. And Oxford and Cambridge were among the 12, but the top 3 or 4 were American universities. So this book, In Rome We Trust, was released in 1917. In 2017. And it is an update on the relation between Rome and the United States of America. It is very shocking reading, and I would like to just read what Wikipedia says about the author, Manlio Graziano. Manlio Graziano, according to Wikipedia, specializes in geopolitics of religion. That's a very interesting, intriguing area of study, geopolitics of religions. This is something that is very much ignored by politicians and scholars in the world. Everyone is preoccupied with politics, but religion also has an influence on politics. This Manlio Graziano, he teaches at the Paris Institute of International Affairs, Sciences, Po, at the Sorbonne, and at the College of Europe. He regularly publishes in Limes, and he has also collaborated with the journals Modern Italy, Geopolitical Affairs, International Affairs, Forum, Heartland, the American edition of his book on Italian political identity. The failure of Italian nationhood was reviewed by the New Yorker and the Economist. In June 2015, he was invited by the UN Correspondents Association to discuss his thesis about geopolitics of religion at the United Nations headquarters in New York City. He is a well-respected scholar, and I say these things so that you may have confidence that this is a serious researcher. He is not one who speculates in any way. What he plainly writes in his book is based on statistics and deep research. And I will quote from this book. I will just give the page number and then the quotation, first the quotation and the page number, and you'll get the feeling of what he has discovered when he goes under the skin of American society, especially the relationship between United States and the Vatican. Personnel of Catholic origin occupy an increasingly important place in the political life of the United States. Particularly striking are not just the dimensions of this phenomenon, but the fact that very few have noticed it or tried to account for it. Very interesting, because that kind of infiltration of Catholics into American politics is profound. And you just see the statistics and you will understand that this is a profound change in American, in shall we say, American religious demographic. It is a very big change. So surprisingly, he states on page 3 in this book, surprisingly enough, this overabundance of Catholics at the forefront of the American political scene has gone almost unnoticed. In no other non-Catholic country is its influence growing the way it is in the United States. The hypothesis of a correlation between the relative decline of the United States and the increase of the Catholic presence in the ruling class of the country is therefore worth testing. It is also worthwhile to test the hypothesis of a correlation between increased American influence and presence within the Universal Roman Catholic Church and its renewed dynamism. You are aware of the fact that it's only Italy that has more Catholic priests than the United States. And it is not only the Vatican that influences American politics, but American Catholics are heavily influencing the worldwide Catholic Church. The College of Cardinals have cardinals from all over the world. The greatest group is the Italian. And it is not that many years ago since the Americans got their first cardinal. Today, the American cardinals are the second largest cardinal groups in the College of Cardinals. That is also very significant. So it's not only the Catholic Church that is influencing American politics, but American Catholics are heavily influencing the worldwide Catholic Church. And all the resources, all the finances, or more than half of all the finances that the Catholic Church worldwide generates comes from America. So United States of America has a very important position now in the Roman Catholic Church. Furthermore, the role of American Catholics in US politics has also completely changed since the 1950s. A Catholic political leadership has been gradually formed, coming to occupy, and under the Obama administration, an unprecedented number of key political, judicial, military, and defense positions at the highest level of the country's institutions of power. Dario Fabri has pointed out that during Barack Obama's second term, the second, the third, fourth, and fifth positions in the federal state are Catholic. To this, we can add, as we have seen, more than 1/3 of the members of the government, all the most important military positions, 2/3 of the Supreme Court, and 38% of US governors. You know, that is really a shocking statement, and it is based on facts. And it is totally different from what we could expect if we go back 100 years. No, things have turned around very much. This Dario Fabri, who has gone into the details and presented this to us, he points out that the second most important person in the American system, the second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth are all Catholics. So only Obama, he was not a Catholic. So the president himself was not a Catholic, but the next 5 in the line of authority, they were Catholics. You may say this is a coincidence, But then he's quoting Agatha Christie, our dear author, Manlio Graciano. He says, is it a coincidence? As Agatha Christie allegedly said, one coincidence is a coincidence. Two coincidences are a clue, and three coincidences are a proof. In this case, we have far more than three coincidences, so we might argue we have proof. So how come that now the political elite in Washington is overrepresented by Catholics? How is that possible in this Protestant country of the United States of America, where when it started 1% and now is about to take over control of Washington? There, US and the Catholic Church current mutual cordiality is explained by the fact that, like all other geopolitical actors, they need allies in the pursuit of their goals. And since, generally speaking, the more powerful the ally, the broader the scope. Since the Catholic Church is the oldest, most centralized, and most widely established institution in the world, and since the Catholic Church is currently, whether one likes it or not, the most authoritative and the most flexible provider of moral principles, it is possible to argue that any link with Catholicism can help improve the steadiness of a nation. So, again, it is confirmed to us when the two most powerful institutions or powers in the world, when they meet, it becomes a tremendous powerful constellation. And we know that America is the most powerful country in the world. The inhabitants of Oslo, they have seen that incredible warship that is visiting us now. And we have also seen the Pope's incredible influence among all people in the world. President Biden, who is himself a Catholic, he stated recently that the Pope is the most popular man in the world. And he himself, the Catholic President of the United States, is a fan of the Pope. The labor unions, they were the first, then the parishes, and finally universities and colleges were sites where a new political Catholic leadership formed and trained itself. And now comes an interesting statement. Every Catholic who occupies an important position at the forefront of the United States political stage comes with a network of relationships, of which other Catholics are inevitably a part. And very often this network is linked to a university or some other Catholic institution, a parish, or even a single priest. As a Catholic ascends to the upper levels of power, his or her entire network ascends accordingly. Some people may say that, okay, Catholic or Protestant, so what? But in that institution of the Catholic Church, whether a Catholic is a liberal Catholic or a conservative Catholic, he is still a Catholic. He has gone to schools, and he has gone to same church as other Catholics. He may actually work together with Catholics in the same workers' union, etc., etc. So this group is very much connected through their religious relationships. The Catholic Church is a single global institution with centuries-long accumulated experience in managing and influencing power. Evangelicals, conversely, are divided into a myriad, according to some sources, more than 30,000 of small churches. This is almost the same that happened in the earliest stages of church history, when there were 5 patriarchs of the Universal Catholic Church, when the Roman Church was not the supreme one until the 500s. And the difference between the Patriarch of Rome, or the Pope, compared to the 4 other patriarchs in Constantinople, in Jerusalem, in Alexandria, and in one other place, these patriarchs, they had to share all of the eastern part of the Roman Empire, whereas the Pope, he had all of the western part on his own. So that was, of course, a very great advantage to rise up to be the supreme in the 500s. The same is the case in America. Protestantism is split into many, many groups. They quarrel, they fight, whereas the Catholic Church is one big unified organization. Even from the 1850s, it was already the biggest church in America. But since there are so many churches in America, it was only a small percentage of the total of the totality of Christians in America. Another quote from this very interesting book of Manlio Graciano: wherever the Pope goes, he is greeted simultaneously as a head of state, a prophet, a tutelary deity, and a rock star, with a distinction and regard that no other religious leader and no other political leader can seriously hope to match. We unquestionably exercise an influence on the world stage whenever the opportunity arises, confessed an anonymous cardinal in 27. He continued, we are the only religious power to have such ability. We are so accustomed to it that we fail to remember to what degree our position is exceptional. You don't get the impression that the case is what we read from this book, because media is never presenting the truths from this perspective. And this writer is emphasizing this point, that it hasn't been noticed very, very much, these facts that Catholic power is invading Washington. Therefore, it seems that the Catholic Church is very happy when the general population believes that they have big problems, challenges, they are struggling to survive and all these things, as the next quotation will say. The decline thesis greatly justifies the Church's traditional low-profile policy, and the more the influence of the Church rises, the more the low-profile policy is needed. Another quotation: the Catholic Church is a complex of opposites, a complexion oppositorum, the Latin phrase. There appears to be no antithesis it does not embrace. Pluralism within the Catholic Church is not an accident, but one of the very conditions of its achievement. With every change in the political situation, all principles appear to change, say one: the power of Catholicism. And that is one of the genius, one of the genius strokes of the Catholic Church, that it can change from one minute to another. Just the fact that it is a church and a country at the same time. What the flexibility. No other church has that privilege. We are speaking of humanity's oldest enduring institution. We can well assume that its leaders know and practice the virtues of pragmatism and compromise to the highest degree of refinement, even more so since the current Pope is a Jesuit. But it is the Church's autonomy that is one of the key factors behind its successes and its credibility. In fact, the more the Catholic Church criticizes consumerism, the American way of life, the death penalty, anti-immigration legislation, abortion, moral relativism, and the Iraq war, the more popular and appealing it becomes in the United States. The Catholic Church has its own political spiritual agenda, which does not match the agenda of any other power. Its purpose is the normative guidance of human social life. As Smith wrote in 1923, transposed to the international level, the goal becomes, in the words of Benedict XVI, the realization of, and this is very important, the realization of a true world political authority, as my predecessor, Blessed John the 23rd, indicated some years ago, namely an authority that is a postulate of the moral order and derives from God. It seems that many people are looking forward to that kind of new world order. And the last statement from our Italian friend, Manlio Graziano: throughout the history of American Catholicism, from the time of the 13 colonies and beyond, there are almost no preconditions that would lead one to anticipate the decisive role of American prelates in the selection of a pope. No preconditions that would forecast a pope who speaks before Congress, received with the warm and abundant applause of American congressmen and congresswomen. Nor are there preconditions for the more than a third of these congressmen and congresswomen being Catholic, or for the vice president, the Speaker of the House, 1/3 of the cabinet, 19 governors, all the military and defense leadership, and in particular 2/3 of the Supreme Court members, also being practitioners of Roman papalatry, followers of the whore of Babylon, as Catholicism and the Catholic Church were long characterized in the United States. It's amazing, especially the Supreme Court. I think now actually there are 7 Catholics and 2 Jews, no Protestants among the members of the Supreme Court. And he mentions here that they are practitioners. They practice their Catholicism. They are dedicated Catholics, these judges. And the Supreme Judge himself is one who practices his Catholicism. Recently, just a week ago, and these things happen very rapidly, a week ago he was accused of receiving money and privileges from a billionaire. So he is in hard weather now, the Supreme Judge, the leader of these judges in the Supreme Court. It is amazing when we think of America as that free country, started as a Protestant country, as a democratic, where there was a strong separation between church and state. That country that promised religious freedom, a full religious freedom, freedom to express your own ideas without being persecuted in any way. So things have really changed. The next picture we see here from the front page of Time magazine, published in 1992, I believe, is that very, very interesting heading, The Holy Alliance, how Reagan and the Pope conspired to assist Poland's solidarity movement and hastened the demise of communism. So if people say that this Pope, he has no real influence, they do not understand geopolitics and the power of the Catholic Church. Recently, the latest Pope, Pope Francis, he was mediator between US and Cuba, and after his successful mediation, better relationships between Cuba and United States of America, and Cubans could now go to America, and things worked out much more nicely for both countries. He is doing quite many good things. I'm not in any way criticizing these wonderful things. I will just say that he has influence, he has power, and he is now allying himself with America, the strongest military force in the world. There should come up in our mind some apocalyptic reflections. This is very unique in world history. This is very unique in church history. America is the superpower of the world. It is challenged by China. It is challenged by Russia. But if you look at all the statistics when it comes to universities, when it comes to popular culture, when it comes to billionaires, when it comes to inventions, when it comes to all these things, America is the leading power, the leading political, military, economical power of the world. This other power, the Roman papacy, is the oldest institution in the world. It's the biggest institution in the world. Most members, more than, I think, 1.2 billion members all over the world. And it is also the richest institution. It is the institution that works in most countries of the world. And when these two powers ally, when they come together, put their powers together, no power in this world can resist this constellation. No power. As this author Manlio Graciano says, nobody could know beforehand that these developments would be reality. Nobody could foresee that. But as a matter of fact, in 1851, there was a man who saw these things clearly. And this man is called John Andrews. John Andrews in 1851, he was one of these Sabbatarian Adventists coming out from the great disappointment in 1844, part of the Millwright movement. Now a nucleus of these Millwrights, they put their heads together and decided to keep the Sabbath, and they expected that Jesus would come back, and they formulated some great doctrines from the Bible, and later on became known as Seventh-day Adventists. John Andrews was the first man in the world to clearly state that the second beast in Revelation 13 is United States of America and fallen Protestantism. When you read the text in Revelation chapter 13, it speaks about a very innocent nation coming up, and this nation was a great blessing to the world, but one day this nation should speak as a dragon. And this nation would one day be so powerful that it would be able to force the world to take the mark of the beast. That is the mark of the biblical Antichrist. This John Andrews, he was the first to see that America is one day going to play a major role in the last day events of this world history. And it was sensational. And at the time he stated these things, we must remember that the papacy had had a terrible humiliation during the French Revolution. It was almost like it had a death blow when Berthier in 1798, on order from the French Republic, invaded Rome with his soldiers, went into the Vatican and took the Pope prisoner. He stole the gold there, and he ordered his soldiers to make 40 posters, and on these posters were stating the words, "The papacy is now abolished. In its place has now come the new Italian Republic." A very humiliating moment for the Roman Church. For more than 1,000 years, it had enjoyed the companionship with the state and had received immense amounts of privileges with its close relationship with the states of Europe. And this made possible a very repressive spiritual dictatorship during the Middle Ages. If you didn't accept the Catholic doctrine, you could be certain that you would be persecuted, even killed in many cases. It was a terrible system that is similar to the very fundamentalist Muslim systems today we can find in certain countries. That was the system that ruled Europe for a long, long time. So when John Andrews stated that the Roman papacy will grow immensely before the last days, before Jesus comes back second time, it was quite unrealistic, even though if the Catholic Church was the biggest church in America at that time. But the likelihood of the Catholic Church to revive after that humiliation 50 years previously, there were small chances for that. Likewise, America, in the days when he said America is that second beast coming up from the earth that will force the whole world to take the mark of the beast, that power, America, was an extremely insignificant military power in 1851. It was very, very low on the list of the most powerful nations in the world. It had no ambitions of imperialistic ambitions whatsoever. They came 50 years later. And yet, John Andrews stated that this power that will force the rest of the world is going to be America. A few years later, Ellen White, she embraced these ideas. And immediately afterwards also that John Andrews had stated these things, he was supported by other Seventh-day Adventists. So from a very early point, this was the firm belief of Seventh-day Adventism, that United States of America, according to the prophecy in Revelation 13, would one day be so powerful that they would be able to force the world to follow the papacy and take the mark of the beast. Ellen White writes about these things in The Great Controversy, and she tells us that the scenario of the last days, although she stated it more than 100 years ago, she stated that in the last days of this world, there will be an alliance between American Protestantism, and the Roman Catholic Church. A very intense relationship in which America will forward the power of the papacy. This is very, very, very interesting because she puts this in her most famous book, The Great Controversy, that she wanted to be spread all over the world. And that book has been spread all over the world. So the remarks that remains to be stated is that every one of us should go to the Bible and read the book of Revelation, chapter 13, and determine for themselves which nations, which powers are the best, are best fulfilling the specifications in that very interesting prophecy. This is something I think everyone who loves God, who loves the Bible, who loves his next door neighbor, it should be an obligation to each one of us to study these things and see if it is correct what has been stated in this presentation. So may God bless you and help you to sort out these things. There are many, many facts that I was not able to present during this short time, but may God bless all of you, and until we meet next time. Bye-bye.